this fourth webinar in our free Tech Forward webinar series. Today we'll be talking about text-to-speech. It's entitled Text-to-Speech, an Introduction for Interpreters. And so we'll be talking about everything related to automatic speech recognition. We see people are really quick on the draw. You've all filtered into the room already, and people are also following us live on YouTube today.
Yes, I'm happy to report that the stream seems to be working, so fingers crossed, everyone.
Wonderful. We're getting more tech savvy every week. In fact, speaking of getting more tech savvy by the week, you might have noticed that I now have this gorgeous custom backdrop here beaming into you from Geneva, and my co-host Alex is beaming in live from Brussels.
Yes, I'm not quite at the Atomium, but close enough, I guess.
And I'm not quite in the council room at the United Nations. But
not an option right now.
Not an option right now. Exactly. So anyways, we are very delighted to have so many people with us today. And I just wanted to tell you a few things before we get started. First of all, this will be an hour-long webinar. We'll try to stick to that hour time frame like we've done for each of our webinars. And indeed, this is the fourth, as I said before. We had 3 others. The first on providing feedback online. The second was our introduction to tech-savvy terminology management. And the third was note-taking 2.0. And this week, we have text-to-speech. Now, as is always the case, we will have the recording available online on our website on the webinars page within 24 hours after this session, and we'll also put up the slides so you will be able to follow along there. Of course, if you missed one of those first 3 webinars, you can head on over whenever you'd like to. They're all posted, all available for you to watch. A few other pieces of housekeeping before we get started. The chat box is available, and I see plenty of people are introducing themselves. I see people coming in from Rome, from Chile, from Mexico City, from Brussels, all sorts of people who are saying hello, from Paris, from The Hague, and so on.
And it's lovely to see you greeting each other as well. So some of you know each other. That's great. So it brings the community together, which is one of the sort of positive side effects of this webinar, I guess.
And actually one of the reasons that we're running these webinars.
For sure, yes.
What we would like to tell you is that this week we'd like to encourage you to ask any questions you have in the Q&A box. Just because that chat box gets rolling really fast and it's hard for us to keep an eye and catch every single one of those messages. So if you have a specific question, please put that in the Q&A box. And I think that's all the housekeeping. Just a brief introduction. As you probably know, I'm Josh Goldsmith, a Geneva-based conference interpreter, technology trainer, and researcher, and half of this duo that makes up Tech Forward. And I'm joined by my co-host, Alexander Drexel, who is a staff interpreter at the European Commission, who does this in a private capacity, of course, who's joining us from Brussels. Right, Alex?
That is correct. Yes. Hello from Brussels, and it's lovely to see you all. And I must say, I'm really excited about today's topic because it's something that's relatively new. We've been doing a lot of tablet stuff and other tech things, but this is relatively new to us. So we're very excited to be able to share that with you today.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're thrilled to be tackling this very tech-savvy topic. Before we dive into the details, though, we have a few polls. Yeah, to get to know the people in the room and find out a little bit about what kind of technology you're using. So the first poll that Alex is pulling up is, do you use a voice assistant of any kind? Do you use Alexa, for example, Siri, Google Assistant, some other type of voice assistant? Or perhaps you don't, and you can pick all that apply, of course. I see many people are already responding. In fact, over half of you have already voted. The numbers are trickling in very quickly.
You'll want to be careful with names, though, because otherwise you'll activate some voice assistants around the world right now.
I was very careful not to say hey yes. before the name of the voice assistant that I use.
Smart move, yes.
Although I have, of course, turned my devices on Do Not Disturb. So we'll give you another 15 seconds or so. If you can't see the poll, it might be hiding behind another window, or it depends exactly on how you're logging in. If you're using
do a little Easter hunt, maybe.
Yeah, if you're using a mobile device, it might be hiding sort of under a little flashing tab or something like that. And in the meantime, it's great to see people from all over the place, from Germany, from the US, from Bogota, from Malaga, from France, Egypt, all saying hi. Okay, I think we'll go ahead and Brazil. I think we'll go ahead and close this first poll and take a look at the results. And it appears that the winner is no, I don't use a voice assistant.
I like that result, I have to say.
67% of you do not use a voice assistant. And then the most frequently used voice assistant after that is Siri, coming in at 23%, followed by Alexa at 10%, Google Assistant at 8%, and other at 3%. If that's an interesting other, you can, of course, put that in the chat, and we will try to keep tabs on that as well. But I think we are ready for our second poll.
We are.
Our second poll is about numbers when interpreting, because one of the things that automatic speech recognition can do is help you to get the numbers right. So we wanted to ask you, what percentage of the numbers do you think you get right when you're interpreting? And you can be honest, it's completely anonymous. We don't track any statistics of any related to polls in any of our webinars or sessions. So feel free to be honest. I see the numbers are also trickling in. We're at 70% of you who have voted already. And I see one person is already telling us what kind of speech recognition tool they use in the chat box, that you use Dragon, which is cool. We'll give you another 10 seconds or so to vote.
This might be one of those situations where the translators are a little bit ahead of the interpreting crowd once again, because they've been using dictation, which is one form of speech recognition, for years already, because it's great for ergonomics.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's go ahead and close that second poll and take a look at the results. And here we have them. Just over half of you say that you think you get about 75% of the numbers right. So 3 out of every 4 numbers you think you get right. A quarter of you are pretty excellent at numbers, getting 9 out of every 10, 90%. And there are some people who aren't that great at numbers, which is totally normal. And in fact, we will be talking a little bit more about that later on. But first, we have one final poll to get the ball rolling, which is about different things that automatic speech recognition can show you while you are interpreting. So if you had the option, if you could pick what this technology were showing you, what would you like to see? Would you like to see numbers? Would you like to see names, perhaps terms and translations from your glossary, a live transcription, or none of this? You can pick all that apply for this question. So we've played with different options, and actually in this session, we are going to get a chance to play with one option. And in fact, I'll use this moment while some people are voting and we're waiting for the answers to come in to say that there's going to be a note-taking exercise later on. We're going to try to do it on a webinar. It will be an interesting experience. So if you do take notes, you want to grab a consecutive notebook, you want to grab a sheet of paper, you want to grab your tablet because you use your tablet for note-taking, you will have that ready for when we get to that point in today's session. So we'll go ahead and close this poll, and the numbers have it. Most of you would like to see the numbers. 90% of you would like to see the numbers. 84% of you would also like to see names. 65% of you, so 2 out of every 3, would like to see the terms and translations from your glossary, and only 40%, a little under 40% of you would like to see a live transcription. So yes, I think these are very interesting results, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later on. Now that we have finished up the polls, we wanted to just tell you a little bit about what we will be covering in this session. So we've started by calling it AI, NLP, ASR, oh my, because we'll be talking about a little bit of an acronym arama here. As we look at all of the different possibilities, we'll explain what those are. Then we will talk about using ASR, automatic speech recognition, for numbers and for terms. We will move on to discussing some hybrid modalities of interpreting just very briefly. So we'll talk about site-consec and sim-consec. We will also talk about some of the challenges of ASR. So accents, languages, speed, and so on. We will, after that, talk about differences between using automatic speech recognition for synchronous work and asynchronous work. And finally, we will talk about those mythical translation apps and earpieces and whether they might herald the end of our profession as we know it. And as we put in the teaser for this, spoiler alert, no.
They don't.
So on that note, maybe I'll turn it over to my co-host Alex to sort of set the tone for what AI is.
Yes, I'm just going to quickly steal the screen sharing from you, if that's okay, Josh.
That's totally fine with me.
Because then I can run the slides from over here. There we are. So yeah, certainly artificial intelligence as a term gets thrown around quite a bit at the moment, which is probably one of the reasons so many of you have signed up for this webinar. And I'll just make a quick disclaimer. We're doing sort of a basic introduction here. So we're not claiming to be AI experts. It's actually something that I would like to explore, maybe to go into more detail for a tech forward course or something else like that. But for now, we're trying to keep it simple and make it practical as well. So in any case, artificial intelligence is sort of different things. You know, it makes sense as well, because if you were trying to define what human intelligence is, that would take different forms as well. You know, some people are very artistic. Maybe they're great at playing an instrument or drawing or painting or something like that. And other people are very good at maths. It's not me, but some people are very good at maths or at sciences and stuff like that. So in the same vein, it's difficult to say what AI exactly is. Of course, it has to do with computers, that's clear. And what's interesting about the concept or the term of artificial intelligence is to know that it was actually coined a little bit as a marketing term in the 1950s, in 1955, when scientists organized sort of the first ever conference or workshop on the topic, because they were trying to see how far they could get with the technology available after the Second World War, how far they could get to basically build, I guess, an intelligent robot or something that would kind of resemble a human person. Needless to say, that they didn't get that far because, as you know, computers were huge, you know, rooms full of technology, and still not even remotely as powerful as they are today. I think that's pretty clear. And I think they had probably very different ideas of what they were trying to do compared to what the scientists and the engineers are doing today. In any case, I think a very important name that will certainly be familiar to you is the name of Alan Turing, who is one of the most eminent early scientists involved in artificial intelligence, but also encryption. So you know, probably we may have heard of the Turing test, which is a test that is still in use today, which is used to determine whether a machine can pretend to be able to hold a conversation like a human being. That's actually something I would encourage you to check out. It's very interesting to read about that because it also, you know, makes us question what is human. And I think that's one of the motivations behind this webinar as well, is trying to find out what the edge of human interpreters is in a time when so many scientists and engineers are trying to work on machine translation and machine interpreting and so on and so forth. So in any case, today the technology is much more powerful, but still there is no what they call general artificial intelligence. And AI is very good at certain specific tasks right now. So be it winning against humans in chess or in Go, the other board game, or beating people in Jeopardy. That was a thing even, which I thought was kind of surprising because of the format, you know, how it inverses question and answer and that kind of thing. But that's, of course, something that has very clear rules. So if something has very clear rules, like a board game, for example, that's something where artificial intelligence can be very good these days already, because that's a very clearly defined task, a very clearly defined objective, where you then sort of try to implement algorithms, i.e. computer code, to solve that problem or help with a given objective. So you're giving it instructions. And the other buzzword, and there's many of those that you've probably heard, is machine learning, which also gets thrown quite gets thrown around quite a bit these days. Sometimes it's just marketing, sometimes it isn't. So machine learning basically means feeding lots of information to a computer or a machine. That could be texts, it could be images. You know, for example, if you use something like Google Photos or Apple Photos, that they try to recognize different faces, like your family members, for example, if you want to use that. So they're very good at recognizing these patterns. And just to briefly mention this, there are two ways to do machine learning. One is unsupervised, where you input a lot of data, text or images, and the computer tries to find patterns and tries to label the things. So, for example, you feed in a lot of images and try to or tell the machine to figure out which image has a cat. So it will try to recognize that pattern. And supervised learning is where you where you annotate the data beforehand, say, okay, this is an image of a cat and this is an image of a dog, and the machine tries to learn with that, but a human still has to label that input data first. If you want sort of a more practical approach to that and want to play around a little bit with artificial intelligence tools and the technology that is available for this, we'll put a link into the presentation to a site at Google. They're very at the bleeding edge of artificial intelligence, and they have a bunch of small little experiments that you can do, especially now in lockdown. You can use this to learn for yourself, or maybe do it with your family. So that's kind of a nice way to sort of get started and explore some of those basic concepts yourself. The sort of main subfield of artificial intelligence that's interesting for us is called NLP, one of those acronyms, or natural language processing. And that sort of has, again, several subfields again. First of all, there's information retrieval. So this would be a case where you, again, throw a lot of data, for example, texts, into a machine, and you tell the machine to search for information that is hidden in those documents. Or you search for documents themselves if you have a huge trove of documents that got leaked, for example, from a big database or something like that. And you'll also tell the machine to describe the information. That's what we call metadata. So describe what kind of information is hidden there. Then on a sort of related note, we have text mining. That's where it gets interesting for us as interpreters, for example. This is where the machine tries to find what we call named entities. So proper names, cities, names of people, for example. Or it also will try to do sentiment analysis, which is also a very en vogue field of artificial intelligence, is trying to analyze text and trying to find out what the mood of the document is, or the mood of the author is who was writing that document. Or things like, automatic summaries of documents and texts, which is something that's been around for a little bit longer already. Also, there's question answering. So that's when you call a hotline sometimes, and you're not talking to a human person first, but to a machine that tries to sort of sort your request into the right box, so you get to the right person eventually, hopefully. But also, of course, voice assistants like Siri or Google Assistant, where you can ask questions like, what's the weather like tomorrow? Or things like that. And then, of course, things like grammar and style check. That's not necessarily new. I mean, Word has been doing this for years, but of course, it's becoming smarter and smarter, because if you look at services like Grammarly now, which some of you may use, it also gives you advice on getting the style right in a document, getting the right sort of level of language, pitching it with the right tone. So it's not just misspellings and simple stuff like that, but it gives you advice on making the language inclusive, and all kinds of things. So that's maybe something to check out if you want a little bit of a writing assistant as well. Also, if you're watching this on YouTube right now, first of all, hi. And secondly, you may know that YouTube does automatic closed captions, or subtitles, if you will. And for that, they also use automatic speech recognition. We'll get to that a little bit later, and provide automatic closed captions, even if the person who has uploaded the video hasn't created any subtitles. And of course, there's a big field of machine translation and machine interpreting, or speech translation, whatever you want to call it, but that's for a little bit later in this webinar. Again, we have a link here for those of you who want to explore a little bit more. And I'll hand it over to Josh for the next topic, which is actually the topic of today's webinar.
Last set of acronyms for the day as well.
Promise.
So ASR, automatic speech recognition. I'm going to try to very briefly walk you through how automatic speech recognition works. So it's this simple. Basically, you have a device. Could be anything that can be recording, basically, or picking up sound, and it captures that sound and it turns these waves, these sound waves, into binary, zeros and ones. And then it tries to clean up the sound a little bit. So how does it do that? Well, it reduces background noise, for example, and it also tries to normalize the volume level. So everything is easier for a machine to understand. Then it takes this digitized audio and it breaks it up into phonemes. Now, phonemes are the basic building blocks of sounds. There's a different number of phonemes in every language, actually. English has 44, interesting side note. And they're the sounds like f, n, m, and s for phonemes, right? Z and s are different sounds and so on. Anyway, so we've got these phonemes and what happens? So the machine has all these little phonemes and it tries to link them together and figure out where the words start and end. And then once it's identified a word, it tries to link these words together into sentences. And how does it do that? Well, it uses statistical analysis and probability. And there's all different kinds of models for how you might go about this. We've put a few on the screen if you want to read up more on that. But I think we will now move on to really getting into we've done sort of setting the stage here. And now we'd like to look at how ASR is useful for interpreters. Now, at the beginning of our session today, we asked you what percentage of numbers you thought you got right. And now we're going to ask you to guess, according to research, what percentage of numbers do interpreters actually get right? So there are 5 options on the screen. You can only pick one: 90 to 95% of the numbers, 80% of the numbers, 60 or 70%, between 60 and 70% of the numbers, 50%, so about half or fewer than half of the numbers are correct. I see the answers streaming in. We've got over 75 of you who have voted. Alex has just put this up on the screen for those following
on YouTube,
yep. YouTube as well, so you'll be able to see how the answers are coming in. We'll give you another 10 seconds to vote.
Do you remember what the most popular reply was in the first poll, the percentage?
75%.
75, okay. It would be interesting to compare.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't put the exact same numbers from this poll in the first one. That would have been an interesting idea, actually. Anyways, it's been a minute, so we're going to go ahead and close that poll. And the good news is that the majority of you got it right. Now, this is a little bit of a trick question because there were 2 ways to get it right. And that's because there's different research out there on this. And some research has found that, now I'm talking about research among professional interpreters, not students. The values for students are quite a bit worse, actually. But among professional interpreters, the studies have shown 30%, 40% errors, so 60 or 70% right. This is with the kind of artificial studies, actually, where you were, Alex, I think we got ahead of ourselves on the screen there. There we go. This is with the, no worries, the studies where they put people in a booth by themselves and they have controlled conditions, and that's what they were finding. A very interesting study is a corpus study of the European Parliament, and there they found an 18% error rate. So everyone who answered 60, 70, or 80% is correct for this. Now, one interesting difference might be that the European Parliament is real data. That's where real interpreters were in the booth. So maybe they were given the speeches in advance. Maybe they had a colleague who was writing down the numbers for them. There are a lot of other reasons that in real conditions, the error rates might be 18%. It's also worth noting that the interpreters at the European Parliament are some of the best interpreters in the world. I mean, that's my personal opinion.
Little shout out.
But a shout out to those working there. Look, the fact of the matter is that numbers are quite difficult, and they're difficult for a lot of reasons. Unlike what we tend to see in normal interpreting, I'll call it, when we're not dealing with numbers and names and really dense information, where there might be repetitions, numbers only come up once most of the time. And actually, every single component of a number counts, right? Every digit counts. There are also some languages where there's a switch in the order of numbers from the source language to the target language, which can add further complication. And yes, there's just a high information density. So that can really crank up the cognitive load. Now, you're probably thinking, we've been telling you a little bit about background, but how does automatic speech recognition for numbers work? Is it any good? Well, we wanted to show you a first video for the moment to see a demo. This is a demo using Interpret Bank's automatic speech recognition feature. So here it is.
Just bringing it up right now. And here we go. Let's keep our fingers crossed.
Want to try it one more time, Alex? I'm not hearing the sound.
It's very weak. Yeah, I'm not sure if I can make it any louder.
This particular video is quite low.
Yeah.
Anyways, what you can see on the screen is the numbers appearing as he's speaking. We have other examples in here, so you'll get to hear it. This particular video has very low sound, but the next one that we've recorded for the example for you has higher sound. But you can see all of these numbers appearing on the screen as he's going along.
And it's a YouTube video, so you can watch it again and again and again if you want after the fact, no problem.
I use this video for teaching quite often, and I always have to crank the volume up as loud as I can. This one happens to be quite quiet. Anyways, right. This is an example, but now we wanted to try in a webinar with several hundred people to give you a real experience doing this. So there are two speeches, well, two versions of the same speech that we've prepared. This is Commissioner Gentiloni talking about the winter 2020 EU economic forecast from a few months ago. So I think the figures might have changed a little bit since then. But in any case, yes, I know that was the understatement of the century. There are two links here. So we'll put the first link into the chat box, and you'll have 1 minute to click on the link, open it wherever you're watching it, and try doing some consecs. So jotting down the numbers as well as you can with this particular link. In 1 minute's time, we'll stop you and give you a version where you can see the numbers appearing at the same time. And we're going to ask you to reflect on the differences. So first you have this first link, and over to you.
Yeah, if you can't open the link, you can either copy and paste it or just type it into the address bar yourself. So it's xl8.link/ASR1, all capital letters. Or otherwise, just do it after the fact, maybe. I mean, there are always some slight hiccups along the way. This might be one of them. But yeah, great to get some feedback from you there. So first, people are reporting that they're done with this little exercise. That's great to know.
So that's been a minute, and now we will move on to the second part where you will see the same speech, but with the numbers appearing alongside it. So we will pop that into the chat box right now. It's just like the former link. So it's http xl8.link/ASR2 this time. So all capital letters on the ASR, and we'll give you a minute now to try the exercise with the numbers appearing. And that's been about a minute here. So now I see some ideas filtering in from you, and I see one person said it was easy, one person said it was fantastic. On the YouTube stream, I see people saying that's pretty cool as well. One person said they got all the numbers, it was easy, but what we really want you to think about is how much easier is it when you have the numbers appearing on the screen alongside what you're hearing. And also, the other question is, well, are they accurate? What were your thoughts on that? I mean, were all of the numbers perfect? I certainly noticed one that was not perfect,
That's the
believe it
tricky
or not.
bit. Yeah.
Yeah, at the
By the way,
very,
there was
very end, there was one that wasn't quite perfect. So very interesting.
Josh, there was a question
Yes, I see
apropos
it.
of this in the chat, yeah,
Yep.
or in the Q&A.
Yep, very good question. Does Interpret Bank's ASR work with other languages or only for English for now? It currently, this is the web-based ASR. So there are two different types of ASR built into Interpret Bank. One is using Google speech recognition using the web interface, and that is currently available for 6 languages, if I'm not mistaken. See if I can remember them off the top of my head: English, Spanish, French, Italian, German, and Portuguese. And you can also set it for different variants of those languages. So British English or American English, for example. I've done some testing. In fact, I did some testing when I was teaching this at a university recently, and some of them work better than others. And in fact, there are a lot of different features that might impact that. And we'll get to that in a minute. When you're using the desktop-based version, it runs with Dragon Dictate. So the languages available are the languages available in Dragon. Excellent question, though. So good, I think we can move on, and we're going to try to show you one more live demo. This one has a new wrinkle, right, Alex?
A wrinkle. Just going to play it. I don't know.
Well, the wrinkle is that it has terminology.
Feature. Yeah, exactly.
Terminology appearing as well. So let's take a look.
It has, exactly. We'll show it first, and then we can discuss. So let's see if this sounds a little bit better here.
I can't hear this one either, but we'll just watch it play out. You can see the terms appearing on the left side of the screen and the numbers appearing on the right side of the screen.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, cut off there. Okay. I think it was still possible to see sort of the lip movements at least, and I would encourage you really to take a closer look afterwards. We'll share the link with you. Again, this video is publicly available on YouTube, and you can do some quality assessment yourself if you like. And I see some interesting discussion already going on in the chat, sort of exploring what the reasons are for sometimes maybe getting it wrong. And as you have seen, this was not only the numbers, but in this case, it was also showing terminology. And of course, since Interpret Bank is a glossary terminology app, it uses the terminology that is already in your glossary. So in this case, of course, it was German and English. So it worked with this language pair. And there is also a way to try that out yourself, which we will be sharing with you. And then you have the possibility to try that yourself, even with your own glossary. And we have another video that is very quick, but which we will skip now in the interest of time, but which we encourage you to watch later, which is, depending on where you stand, one of the best or one of the worst actors, but that's besides the point. This, in any case, is the web interface that you can try for yourself. It can be found at interpretbank.eu/ASR, so automatic speech recognition. And you can see here on the left, we have a window for terminology, on the right, a window for numbers. So that's where the results will show up. And you can just start it and it will use the microphone. So for example, you could either give a speech yourself, or you could play another speech of YouTube, or a recording that you may have on your smartphone. For example, you just hold it next to the microphone of your laptop and you can give it a try immediately and see how well it works or not. And you see there all the way at the bottom of the screen, there are also some options to choose languages and local varieties. So in this case, UK English. So those are some possibilities to see what ASR can do right now, actually, which I think is quite impressive. But of course, there are still some challenges and some problems left for ASR to solve. And I don't know, maybe some of those can't be solved at all. What do you think, Josh?
That might be
Simple
the
question, right?
$1,000,000 question, Alex. And there are a lot of people spending a lot of time and a lot of money trying to solve many of those questions. We've put some of the potential challenges related to ASR on the screen. You can just put those slides back up for us. There we go.
There was an audio issue, so.
Yeah, I know you were just trying to tweak that. So the question is, some of the issues that you might have are to do with speed. For example, most of the tests in the research done on ASR uses controlled conditions, 120 to 140 words per minute. But I think most of us know that that's not actually the case in most of our meetings anymore. There are also differences between spoken text and written text, but if a machine is trained on a written corpus rather than a spoken corpus, there can be challenges there. Of course, we all have different accents. Some accents can even be quite thick for human interpreters to deal with, so there can be challenges there. There can always be background noise coming in. Some words are homophones or homonyms, so they mean two different things. It's hard to disambiguate what that word might mean. And it's also quite difficult for a machine to figure out when one word ends and the next word begins, and when a sentence ends and the next sentence begins. Of course, not everybody's a good speaker. I'm sure we've all interpreted for some rather poor speakers in our time. And there are more things than just words that we hear. In fact, we often are picking up on nonverbal cues as an important part of what we are doing when we're interpreting. So I did see that there was a question about whether you can use this for live speeches. If you look at the Interpret Bank website, you can read more about that. It is possible to plug in your console to your computer. It's a little bit difficult to do it, but in theory, it's possible to do so and then process things in real time. Of course, bear in mind that there are confidentiality issues as well if you're using a web based ASR system instead of one that is just on your computer. So I did want to take that very interesting question there. Now, we wanted to briefly talk about how ASR could be used for some kinds of hybrid interpreting modalities. So the first one I've put on the screen is just called ASR supported, because it's so new that there's not even a name for it. And the idea is just some components of automatic speech recognition of this transcription could be used to support you in some form of interpreting. Now, why do I say in some form of interpreting? That's because we're leading right into these hybrid modes of interpreting, which we'll be talking about much more in our course on new frontiers in interpreting technologies next week. Now, what do I mean by that? Simconsec is the first one. In simconsec, simultaneous consecutive, you're in a setting that might be a setting where you would normally do consecutive, but you record the speech as you're going along, and then you can work from the recording, but also potentially from your notes or from a blend of the two. And maybe your notes look different when you're doing this. And actually, there's very cool features where you can click and listen again, but we'll talk a lot more about that next week. The other hybrid modality I wanted to just briefly mention is one called sight consecutive. It's like sight translation, the idea being that you would use a transcription to then, so you get a transcription coming out of a machine as somebody's delivering a consecutive speech, and then you work from that transcription rather than from your notes or something else. So a kind of sight translation there. And if anybody in the room is doing this, we would love to hear more about your experience with these hybrid modalities. But I think now we wanted to turn to the elephant in the room. Right, Alex?
Yeah, it's actually standing right behind me, and it's a very small room, so I feel compelled to address it. Let's talk a little bit about apps, because, you know, there's an app for pretty much everything these days. We've talked a little bit about the theory and sort of the science behind artificial intelligence and how it kind of works in the beginning. And now we talked about these sort of very advanced or maybe even experimental ways of doing interpreting, leveraging or using these new technologies based on speech recognition. But a lot of that tech, so both artificial intelligence, machine learning, pattern recognition, is already something that we can use today. And it's kind of interesting also in our sort of multilingual context, I think. So if you use an app on your smartphone, like Google Translate or the Microsoft Translator, you'll be able to use these features right now, and you may be using them already. So for example, the first one here is very neat, is where you can point your camera at let's say a sign or maybe a menu in a restaurant where you don't know, in a country where you don't know the language. By the way, I hate interpreting menus for delegates. That happens a lot of the time, and, you know, especially fish. But anyway, let's not get into
what
this.
a disaster.
Exactly. I might potentially use a tool like this to just point the camera at the menu and get an immediate sort of automatically generated image, which is pretty cool if you think about it. And then you can see sort of the translation, hopefully accurate translation of what you're looking at. Or another feature right here is you can, of course, get text translations of simple text, you know, by using an app like Google Translate or Microsoft Translator. And as we'll hear a little bit later, it happens quite often that these functionalities require an internet connection, but increasingly you can just download the information that is necessary for the app to do its job onto your smartphone, and then you can even use it when you don't have an internet connection, like for example on a plane, as it's shown here, or if you're somewhere out in the sticks where there is no internet connection, you could still use that functionality to some extent. Or what's also interesting is sort of a conversion of handwriting or drawn symbols, for example, into typed text. That is something that we went into a little bit more detail in our live course this week, which was about iPad interpreting, because there are some cool note-taking apps that also convert handwriting into typed text, which again is a pretty neat feature. Then, of course, there are now some apps that even let you have a conversation, a text-based conversation across language barriers, as they like to say. So they use machine translation for that kind of functionality as well. Or maybe just to give one last example here, you can use apps like Google Translate or the Microsoft Translator for, let's say, simple conversations. I think even going back and forth, for example, asking for directions or where your hotel is or something like that. So even for that, you don't necessarily need sort of a specific device. You can just use the app on your smartphone. And as you can see here on the screenshot, it's quite clever actually, because you can hold it between you and the other person. I mean, you know, once you're allowed out of the house anyway, and then you can both sort of follow the conversation in text form as well on the smartphone. And of course, also hear the audio and speak as well. So there's already sort of a lot of nice functionality in there, which I think brings us neatly to the sort of next frontier, which could be called machine interpreting. A lot of people don't like that term, including me, because it's not really interpreting, as it's very much sort of word-based or sort of language-based. And as you know, interpreting is much more than just transferring a word or a sentence or an utterance from one language to the next. So people are working on, let's just call it speech translation or speech-to-speech translation with a so-called cascaded system. That sounds more fancy than it is. It just means that there's a sort of sequence or cascade to how it works. So as we've seen earlier, there is a speech recognition part, a speech to text, where sort of analog audio is converted into digital information that is useful to the computer. You can do a little bit of sort of correction and cleanup after this step. Josh explained that earlier by, you know, adjusting the volume, normalizing volume, or removing sort of background noise or wind noise or whatever it may be. And then it goes on in the cascade to the next step, which would then be the actual machine translation part, which, you know, is already working quite well for some scenarios, at least, and for some language pairs. Because I mean, that's one of the things as well. A lot of these things work well for English and other quote unquote big languages, but not so well for so-called smaller languages. And again, this machine translation can then sort of be cleaned up or corrected with some algorithms to produce a decent result. And once you have that translated text, you can then, of course, have speech synthesis. Oh, difficult word. So you can do text to speech. That's much easier, and generate spoken text basically out of that translated result. And that brings you sort of to this conversation, basically. Yeah, I see Federica in the chat mentioning Wordly. That does basically this. That's at least my understanding. And I think we had a quick demo here. So we'll try again with the video. I know that's sometimes not obvious showing video in a live online webinar. But again, this is a YouTube clip. And if somehow it doesn't come through right now in the webinar, we'll give you the link and you'll have the chance to watch it again after the fact. So let's see if this works.
This is a new multi-device translation feature on the Microsoft Translator application.
Si tratta di una nuova funzionalità di traduzione multi-device sull'applicazione Microsoft Translator.
Wir können eine echte Konversation halten über die Sprachbarriere hinweg.
Possiamo mantenere una vera conversazione attraverso la barriera linguistica.
Et il est possible de parler jusqu'à 10 langues différentes.
Ed è possibile parlare fino a 10 lingue diverse.
100 people can participate in the same conversation at the same time.
100 persone possono partecipare alla stessa conversazione allo stesso tempo.
Oh, Josh, I can see you suffer over there.
I was suffering a little bit.
Yeah.
Not so much for the words. I think that the translation was pretty close. Obviously, this was a very basic thing that they were trying to have interpreted or translated or whatever you want to call it, rendered in another language. But that speech synthesis piece was really doing me in.
Yeah, Darinka feels the same. The robotic voice is so disturbing, she writes.
Very difficult to listen to a robotic voice, absolutely. And, you know, there's one other key piece to mention here, which is the lag. I mean, basically, this was some sort of liaison interpreting, if you want to call it that, where you did a sentence and then there was that was translated into the other sentence in this terrible robotic voice. But I think that that says a lot about where machine interpreting is.
At least right now.
At least right now, but we'll be discussing that in lots more detail next
There
week. I don't think it'll change between this week and next week, by the way.
No. But to be fair, I mean, there are better sort of robot voices out there that sound more natural. So I think this is not necessarily the latest development maybe, but it is definitely very tiring to listen to. I would completely agree. Just in case you want to try your hand at this as well, this was a demo from the Microsoft Translator. You can try this. I suppose most of you know Skype and maybe use Skype from time to time if you're not using Zoom. And Skype has a feature built in. So you can go ahead and try that yourself. If you have the latest version or a reasonably up-to-date version of Skype, you can enable those features. And they have two features, basically. It's the voice translator. As you can see here, it currently works for English, Spanish, French, German, Mandarin, Chinese, Italian, Brazilian, Portuguese, Arabic, and Russian. So you can use that to have sort of a voice conversation, and you'll always see the text as well, both the transcription of the original and the translated version, so you can sort of see and compare. I think that's quite useful. And you can also have automatic translation in the Skype chat. If you have a text chat, that works for over 60 languages at the moment. There's a long list of supported languages. Again, we will give you the link to this feature, and we would encourage you to try it out yourselves and just see how well it works or how not so well it works, depending on which. And that brings me to the next topic, and I'll hand it over back to Josh.
Yes, indeed. The next topic, we wanted to very briefly tell you about some of the devices that are out there, those in-ear translators that aim to replace interpreters. So here's one. It's not an in-ear translator. It is a physical device. As you can see, you hold it in one hand, and it's a very peculiar device, in my opinion. It's called the ILI translator, and it's billed as a one-way translator. So the idea is that you're going on vacation, you speak English, and then you've programmed it for Japanese, Mandarin, Spanish, or Korean, and you press the button, say what you want to say, and then it renders your message in the other language. And it's designed primarily for travel-focused phrases, so things related to restaurants, shopping, asking for directions, asking for recommendations, really trying to work with a very small subset of potential topics, because that's one way that you might be able to get a device like this one, which doesn't have an internet connection, to be able to process what you're saying by really keeping it very narrow. This is a one-way device. I don't know how useful a one-way device actually is. You can watch all sorts of videos about this if you want to see how they think it should be used. At $200, I'm not 100% certain that it's my device of choice.
I would probably say if it's just unidirectional, it's probably only slightly more useful than just shouting loudly in English or whatever other language you may be using. Anyway, but it is there. And of course, these devices tend to generate a lot of buzz and a lot of hype in the media because they always position themselves at the device that finally sets you free of all existing language barriers, which of course is mostly marketing hyperbole. But these things tend to do some interesting stuff, and I think it's important for us to keep an eye on it and see what's happening. So these two devices you may have seen before. So the left one, these two red earbuds, that is called the Pilot from Waverly Labs, which is a tech company who has been at this for quite a while. And they launched these red buds, the Pilot, to much fanfare and a crowdfunding campaign. And they gathered a lot of money, collected a lot of money. The device was then quite late, but it was eventually shipped. But it turned out it wasn't quite as great as they made it sound in the beginning, because they basically said, this is finally the Babelfish. You put this thing in your ear and you can speak any language. That's the short of it. Then it turned out, okay, it's a pair of earbuds, but you still have to use the corresponding app, which goes on your phone. So you're still not quite free of your smartphone, which is what they initially said. So that wasn't great. And the latest launch, or the latest device, is on the right side of the slide here, which is called the Ambassador, which is an over-ear device. I think that makes more sense. So you place it over your ear. This headphone form factor may be familiar to you. So you still hear the original sort of room noise, and you can hear the other person speaking as well. But I think it still works with the app, but apparently you can now leave the smartphone in your pocket and just use this device to hold a conversation. Again, we'll put a link in here. You can look at the marketing videos and decide if that's something that sort of sounds plausible to you. It's going to be interesting to see how much that actually gets picked up, because after all, it's also quite expensive tech, and lots of these things you can do with your smartphone, you know, some kind of app that already exists and the earbuds that you already have. But that's just my impression of these things. And as we're nearing the end of this webinar, maybe just a very quick outlook on what's sort of the current next frontier that the big tech companies are working on. You may have heard of the Google Translatotron, which is a very nerdy, sort of techie name. But what they're trying to do is move beyond this cascade model that we showed you earlier with these individual steps and the sequence of steps of speech to text, machine translation, and then text to speech. So what the Google Translatotron tries to do is going directly from one speech to the other speech without doing the translation bit in the middle. And I've been reading about this for quite a while now. I still find it difficult to wrap my head around this. I don't know about you, Josh, but the way it's intended to work is that there's no text representation. So it digitizes the speech and then sort of transmogrifies it and turns it into speech in the target language. And the advantage, at least according to the Google engineers, is that it's faster because you have you don't have this extra step in the middle. It goes from one, what they call a spectrogram, to the other spectrogram, so the voice print, they call it. And they also say that that way they can retain the characteristics of the original speaker's voice. So not just how the voice sounds, but also things like intonation, apparently. Of course, we all know that's a little bit difficult because that works differently from one language to the next. So I find it really interesting to see how this developed, and at the moment the performance isn't quite as good as the traditional sort of cascade or sequence system, but certainly it sounds very good. So again, we have a link here in our slides, which we encourage you to check out, because they have some results from the original and the translation, shall we say, and you can compare what it sounds like. And apparently it's also a better handling of names and proper nouns, which kind of brings us full circle, because that's what we covered towards the beginning of the webinar in terms of using ASR as a support tool for interpreters. And of course, I cannot finish talking about the Translatotron without showing you this rather awful diagram, which is intended to show how the Google Translatotron works. For me, the only thing it does is confuse me, but maybe some of you are more skilled at reading this than I am. In any case, this was sort of the bleeding edge of ASR technology, and that is also kind of the highlight of this webinar. I could imagine that maybe there are still some questions out there, or maybe there are some comments that you want to share with us or everybody else. So in that case, feel free to put it into the chat, or maybe raise your hand. If you have a longer intervention, we're happy to give you the floor if you want to share something with us. Josh, you're still muted.
There were some great questions coming in over the, not fast enough on the draw, too much multitasking. There were some great questions coming in over the course of this session, and we've very much enjoyed addressing them. You can keep sending those questions in, but in the interest of time, we're going to start wrapping up and tell you about what comes next. First of all, as always, we are running this webinar series for the foreseeable future, every Thursday, same time, same place. You can sign up for our mailing list. You can join us, of course, send us ideas and questions if you have them. Head on over to our website, techforward.com, to learn more, and check us out on any type of social media. By any type of social media, I really mean we're on almost all of them now. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and our new YouTube channel is now up and running. And of course, if you want to support what we're doing at Tech Forward, we very much appreciate it. And we know it's a difficult time, but anything that you can give during this period is very much welcomed. It helps to chip in for all of our back-end costs, for the software that we use, for the platforms that we use, and for all of the research that we do as well, and preparation, so that we can share this information with you. So our suggested donation is €10 per webinar. and anything that you can chip in would very much be welcomed. And I do want to thank all of the people who have been donating. I've tried to answer every donation email individually, and we really appreciate it. So thank you for supporting what we are doing. A few more things about what comes next. As you know, we have been running a series called Tech Forward Live. It started 2 weeks ago. We ran our first 3-day, 6-hour course on glossaries and tech-savvy terminology management. That was 2 weeks ago. Last week, or no, this week, that is, we ran the tablet interpreting iPad course. And next week, we have a course looking at everything we've been talking about today, but in a heck of a lot more detail. The course is called New Frontiers in Interpreting Technologies. Unlike the other courses, this one is Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday of next week, since Monday is a public holiday in many places. So April 14th, 15th, and 17th, we'll be talking about SimConsec, SiteConsec, hybrid interpreting modalities, automatic speech recognition, live subtitling, machine interpreting, and it's hands-on and interactive. So you will get a chance to try some of these things out yourselves, get all of your questions answered, at least to the greatest extent possible. There's one other really cool thing that we are delighted to launch today. A lot of you said to us, well, it's great that you're running these Tech Forward Live courses, but I can't make it at the same time every week for those 2-hour slots. Is there any way that we could have access to these materials? Well, you asked for it and you got it. We have turned the Glossaries for Interpreters 2.0 course into an on-demand course. It is literally, it went live about an hour before we started this session. It is a course with 5 modules packed with information, over 30 videos, over 20 interactive exercises, so you can work your way through terminology management and learn how it works. And we are offering a special early bird sale for anybody interested. The coupon code is earlybird10, and the first 10 people to sign up will get 20% off. So special deal for anybody interested in joining me at your own pace and learning all about glossaries for interpreters. And finally, we wouldn't want to end the course without asking for your feedback. I've just put the link to the feedback in the chat here, and I see some of you are also asking for a special link to the early bird course. I'll put that in. Let me just pull that up. And in the meantime, I'll turn it over to you, Alex, to start wrapping things up.
Yeah, exactly. It's already 2 minutes after 6 p.m. over here in Brussels and also in Geneva, and we want to be respectful of your time. Thanks again for joining us. What we would very much like you to do is provide us some feedback if you have the time and if you would like to help us out, both positive and negative feedback. We're always trying to get better and improving things around here, which we have done with the YouTube live streaming, hopefully, for example, to provide all of you the possibility to join us, even if the Zoom webinar is limited to 100 attendees at the same time. So please check out our feedback form at xl8.link/webinar feedback, all one word, all small caps, or all one word in any case. And I think we have nothing more to say than thank you very much once again. All the information that you could possibly want is on techforward.com. Feel free to say hello on social media as well. We always like to hear from you. And unless we see you in one of our live courses, we hope we see you during next week's live webinar. And that's it for today. Take care. Stay safe. Bye-bye.